So if you were not here for the 25th, this is the lecture that we did. So you are able to get your active listening notes. Keep in mind, I have not made the updated the pictures yet, so all of them are going to be the same. So what were we talking about today? We were talking about child labor and labor unions. So child labor, why would they use kids in these factories and these mines, right? So one reason, it was cheaper. You could pay them less than the adults, and they were less likely to walk off the job or something like that. Their parents were usually making them go to provide for the family. So the kids did not have as much choice as like the adults did. Small size. So whether that be in a textile factory where you need to reach into a machine for some reason, the smaller hand sizes of children made it easier, or in coal mines, if you needed to get into small spaces, that can make it easier. Like I said, cheap wages, that's kind of redundant for cheap labor, but didn't have to pay them as much, and lack of labor laws. So the reason we don't have as much child labor now is because labor laws prohibit it. So before there were no laws, so they would just take advantage of anyone they could take advantage of. So how common was it? It is hard to see. I see a lot of statistics from the American Labor Bureau, but could not find too much from England. So we are really focusing on America with these stats. So between 1870 and 1900, it was estimated that 10 to 20% of children were working in these mines or factories. And what type of work? Most common was coal mines and textile mills. So imagine being a kid having to work in coal mines, especially working there all day. You wake up and it's dark out and you go to your job at coal mine and you work 12, 14 hours and you get out and it's dark again. So you're almost living with no real sunlight, right? Hard to imagine. Working conditions, bad. So as I said, very harsh and dangerous conditions for the children. There were very long working hours, so not uncommon to work 12, 14 hours a day. Again, they had lower wages. I don't know why I put that twice. Let me edit that. So there are a lot lower wages for child laborers. So they get treated worse and they don't get paid as much. And anything they do get paid pretty much has to go to their families. Child labor statistics. So in 1870, the census then was saying about 1 in 8 children were employed. In 1890 and 1910, about 18% of children were going to be employed. That's from ages 10 to 15. And this will all lead to the Fair Labor Standards Act passed in 1938. It did establish maximum hours that they could work. I think it was 44 hours per week. It established a minimum age roughly at 16, although there were ways to kind of get around that, like working for your family business, things like that. But these are closer to similar labor laws we see protecting children nowadays. So again, those laws weren't just given for no reason. The role of labor unions. So labor unions are going to be a big reason why this child labor does eventually end, right? So the emergence of labor unions happens in response to exploitation. The workers felt like they were being taken advantage of. They didn't have a voice. They were forced to accept these bad conditions. They were forced to accept bad wages. And so they felt like they needed to be able to do something to fight back. So their goals were to have better conditions, to have fair wages, and to have worker rights. So better conditions meaning safer, fair wages, be able to live off of one person in the family or 2 people in the family, not have to be able to force your kids into work. And then workers' rights, so the right to demand these things without getting fired, the right to have days off or sick days or things like that. And they do come up with collective bargaining. So the idea of collective bargaining is negotiating as a large group. I kind of talked about it before. If one person goes into the manager's office and says, I demand to get paid $1 more an hour, the manager will laugh it off and maybe fire them. But if 95% of your whole company all goes and demands higher wages, they're less likely to fire 95% of their workforce because they won't be able to make any money, right? So collectively, the people come together to be able to bargain with the managers and owners. So what are examples of early labor unions? So one of the first ones is going to be the National Labor Union. In 1969, we are going to see the Knights of Labor. In 1886, we are going to see the American Federation of Labor. And what these labor unions were mostly doing, they were protesting unsafe conditions and long hours. And as I was talking about, they do stage walkouts of the factories. One of the drawbacks is a lot of these labor unions only represent skilled laborers. Think of it like a guild. So like masons or iron workers or things like that. So an unskilled laborer, someone who just worked in a factory, wasn't going to be as protected as someone who did a specific job. Think of like someone working in a trade, right? But the work of labor unions is pretty successful. They do have the Factory Acts, 1833. It is going to restrict child labor in England. So as I talked about in America, it doesn't go into effect until a lot longer. And this Factory Act in 1833 doesn't completely restrict child labor, but it is starting to put laws in place. In 1844, we are going to see protections for women and further protections for children. And then in 1847, they're basically just going to strengthen those laws. So they're going to make them more strict, restrict them to fewer hours that they can work, or higher age minimums, right? So these unions are successful. And lastly, what is the legacy of the labor movement? It did improve working conditions. It did end child labor for the most part. I mean, we still do under 18, but the exploitative child labor that was happening, it does empower workers to be able to demand better wages, to be able to have a family where maybe just the dad is going into work and that's able to provide for the whole family. And it does increase wages for employees. So again, freeing up another person to be able to take care of the kids at home rather than everyone having to go into work just to survive. All right, so then I do have a next ticket. I haven't made it yet, so make sure you do that and have a great day.